Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham. The president's move to restore a relationship between the United States and Cuba is being met with mixed reactions. While some are celebrating, others are protesting the developments that have the two countries that were once on the brink of war now preparing to open embassies. And some Republicans are preparing to block the deal that would end America's more than 50-year-old policy to isolate Cuba.
We want to see greater freedom, greater prosperity, greater opportunity for ordinary Cubans.
President Obama went public with a deal reached in secret Wednesday. He's restoring full diplomatic relations with Cuba for the first time since the height of the Cold War. It's a deal that's said to have been in the works for years, but the final agreement took place after the president and Cuba's Raul Castro spoke on the phone Tuesday, and following Cuba's release of U.S. government contractor Alan Gross and another American intelligence officer in exchange for Cuban spies held in the U.S. Gross was imprisoned for 5 years.
I'm incredibly blessed finally to have the freedom to resume a positive and constructive life.
The deal is the beginning of the end of 5 decades of the U.S. economic blockade of Cuba. It calls for a review of Cuba's status as a state sponsor of terrorism, clears the path for the U.S. to open an embassy in Havana, and opens the door for Americans to visit the largest island in the Caribbean.
I think it's great. It's about time.
Getting back a lot of our Cuban heritage and going to see our family will be easier.
But with the celebration of this historic move, there's also protest.
Obama, coward!
In places like Miami's Little Havana community, outcries from families who lost loved ones in 1996 when Cuban fighters shot down their planes.
The worst president that we have in this country for many years.
And in Washington, Senator Marco Rubio spoke out against the deal, calling President Obama the worst negotiator since Jimmy Carter.
These changes will only lead to greater wealth and influence for this oppressive regime, especially the military.
And in social media, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted he vows to block the opening of a U.S. embassy in Cuba. And presidential hopeful Jeb Bush is also weighing in. He tweeted, calling the deal massive executive overreach. Federal investigators say North Korea is behind the unprecedented cyber attack against Sony. The U.S. penetrated North Korean computer networks to trace the source of the hacking. The primary suspects are members of a North Korean cybersecurity unit called Bureau 121. Investigators are not ruling out the possibility an insider at Sony helped North Korea. Sony decided to cancel the release of the film targeted with the threat. President Obama weighed in on the hacking.
The cyber attack is very serious. We're investigating it. We're taking it seriously. We'll be vigilant. If we see something that we think is serious and credible, then we'll alert the public. But for now, my recommendation would be that people go to the movies.
The interview is about a celebrity journalist and his producer who land an interview with Kim Jong-un and are instructed by the CIA to assassinate him. The state of New York is banning fracking. That's the practice of removing oil from shale by using a method known as hydraulic fracturing. Governor Andrew Cuomo says he made the decision to ban fracking out of health concerns. 2 state agencies cited adverse health effects in communities where fracking is practiced.
I've never had anyone say to me, I believe fracking is great. Not a single person in those communities. What I get is, I have no alternative but fracking, and if you say no to fracking, then I have no alternative. And I own a farm, and I have to pay a mortgage, and I have to pay these incredible property taxes, and there's no economic opportunity.
Their report also raises concerns about the long-term effects of fracking, saying more research is needed to prove it is not harmful to air and water. It also says fracking will not provide an economic boom because there's too little shale available. President Obama has often threatened if Congress will not pass laws he wants, he'll go ahead and just act on his own. And he's made good on the threat numerous times. As Paul Strand reports, it's happened so many times, protesters say he's throwing our constitutional system off balance.
Barack Obama answers charges he's guilty of presidential overreach by saying he's issued fewer executive orders than any other president in the last 100 years. But he's not mentioning he's issued way more presidential memoranda than any of his predecessors. Those memoranda, just like executive orders, bear the weight of law and don't need any congressional approval or action. When it comes to other presidents issuing memoranda, the only other two who even cracked 100 were Clinton and Bush. Obama has already issued about 200. House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte worries the president is acting on his own so much he's doing constitutional damage.
Well, he's overreaching in a multitude of ways. There are dozens of examples. Obamacare itself, he has now in 40 different matters changed Obamacare.
Well, it's serial lawlessness.
National Review's Andrew McCarthy, in his book Faithless Execution, lists dozens of examples of Obama doing this.
Where he's either waived the law, unilaterally modified the law, refused to enforce the law. Immigration is another area where we just had a continuous series of situations where the president has just made up the law as he goes along.
These gentlemen joined a recent panel at watchdog group Judicial Watch to discuss this overreaching by the president. Host Tom Fenton said Obama's acting more like a monarch than an elected leader with limits.
In the words of Thomas Jefferson, to appoint a monarchist to conduct the affairs of a republic is like appointing an atheist to the priesthood.
This is a very serious constitutional issue.
Goodlatte points out Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution states only legislators can make law. The thing is, everything President Obama does, any president does, sets a precedent. And those precedents live long after the man has left the office. And McCarthy warns those who applaud this presidential overreaching should beware.
The people who are happy, I suppose, with President Obama's agenda today may not be happy if the next lawless president is from the other side of the aisle, and they find themselves, as we seem to find ourselves today, powerless to rein him in.
Leading law professor Jonathan Turley, a liberal who voted for Obama, wrote in the Los Angeles Times that he's very worried where Obama is taking the country, saying, "The United States is at a constitutional tipping point, the rise of an uber presidency unchecked by the other two branches." McCarthy says Obama's overreaching is now so fast and frequent, opponents can't fight him on every front.
If you're doing it day after day after day, as President Obama is on every issue, you essentially overload the system.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
President Obama's executive order on immigration will face a legal challenge. The American Center for Law and Justice is representing 27 members of Congress in a federal lawsuit filed by 24 states, challenging the constitutionality of the president's immigration action. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Jordan Seculo explained what the lawsuit could potentially mean for the executive order.
This lawsuit can do a number of things. As we saw yesterday, a judge in Pennsylvania in a criminal immigration case put out pretty clearly they believe that the President Obama's action as a federal judge was unconstitutional. That was a one-person case. It wasn't dealing with the entire executive action by President Obama. He's done by memorandum here. This case will seek an injunction, so it could put a halt to President Obama's action going into force while the actual issues are litigated. So there's a two-step process here. The first is to try and stop what President Obama has done from going into force, which will be sometime this late winter, early spring, the administration has said. And then second, to actually fully litigate this issue. Does the president have this kind of power to take this action on his own without Congress?
To see the entire interview with Jordan, simply log on to cbnnews.com. The Supreme Court denied Arizona Governor Jan Brewer's bid to keep so-called dreamers from getting driver's licenses in 2012. President Obama initiated a program allowing the children of illegal immigrants to stay and work in the U.S. According to the Arizona Star, Brewer says dreamers are not eligible under Arizona law to receive driver's licenses. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals denied the appeal, and the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices refused to issue a stay on the ruling while the case works its way through the court system. The war on Christmas strikes in the Hoosier State. The American Civil Liberties Union of Indiana is filing a lawsuit over a nativity scene in the town of Brookville. That's about an hour south of Indianapolis. The ACLU reps say the nativity scene, quote, represents an endorsement of religion and has the principal effect of advancing religion. Therefore, it violates the Constitution. The nativity scene has been a town tradition for more than a half century. City leaders disagree with the lawsuit and say they welcome displays from other religions as long as those displays are tasteful. I want to turn now to Kentucky, where the battle over the Ark Park appears to be heating up. The Christian group building the massive wooden ark says they plan to fight the state's rejection of tax incentives for the project. Ken Ham, president of Answers in Genesis, says losing the tourism tax rebate would be costly, but construction of the Ark Encounter theme park will continue. Now, to learn more about why the state claims the park is not eligible for tax breaks, log on to cbnnews.com and search Ark Park. Make sure you let us know what you think about the situation. Well, coming up, Israel's prime minister says Europe is falling into a trap. Hear what he had to say about Hamas being removed from the EU's list of terror organizations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Europe is falling into the trap of appeasing terrorists by pressuring Israel. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has that story.
It was a rough day for Israel in Europe.
Today we witnessed a series of examples of European naivete, and may I add, hypocrisy.
Those examples included the following. The European Court removed Hamas from its list of terrorist organizations. The European Parliament voted in principle to recognize a Palestinian state. And certain parties to the Fourth Geneva Convention called to investigate Israel for war crimes.
All these point in the same direction. They point to a spirit of appeasement in Europe of the very forces that threaten Europe itself. Too many in Europe are calling on Israel to make concessions that would endanger not only the security of Israel, but also, paradoxically, the security of Europe itself.
The European actions came on the same day Jordan submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council, calling for peace between Israel and the Palestinians within a year, and an Israeli withdrawal from biblical Judea and Samaria within 3 years. Speaking to foreign journalists at the annual New Year's toast, Netanyahu described Israel as an embattled democracy in a region plagued by tyranny and Islamist terrorism.
Israel is forced to defend itself against terrorists who time and again try to target our civilians. This summer, they fired thousands of rockets on our cities, and they used their civilians as human shields. That's a second war crime.
Netanyahu said peace won't last in the Middle East unless it can be defended. And European declarations against Israel only reinforce Palestinian intransigence and push peace away.
Peace will only come when the Palestinians are willing to confront their own extremists. And instead of rewarding Palestinian intransigence, the European democracies should support the one and only democracy in the Middle East, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the State of Israel.
The increased pressure comes at a time when Israel is preparing for national elections. Some believe the European moves are intended to weaken Netanyahu because he's an Israeli leader who resists the move to appease Islamic terrorism. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, what do two Regent University students, orphans in India, and a 95-year-old American woman have in common? Wendy Griffith shows us their lives, how their lives are tied together with a common thread of love. Last Christmas, Connie Vitolo was depressed. The 95-year-old felt she had no purpose in life and she could care less if she lived or died. But this year, it is a completely different story. Connie can hardly wait for Christmas, not because of anything she's expecting to receive, but because of what she's giving. Wendy Griffith has her inspiring story.
These orphans in India don't know it yet, but they're getting something special for Christmas this year. Coming from someone they've never met, half a world away, in Virginia. 95-year-old Connie Vitolo has spent the past year making blankets for the children, one stitch at a time.
Well, how many blankets have you crocheted for the orphans so far?
A dozen.
12, and I'm on my 13th
On number
one.
13 right now. And I understand that you pray over every blanket.
Oh, I pray for every one of them. I pray to Jesus and I thank him every day. When I finish one, I said, thank you, Jesus. Don't let me die before I finish my blanket.
Not long ago, Mrs. Vitolo didn't care whether she lived or died. After a bad fall, she had to leave her New Jersey home and move in with her daughter in Virginia. Before long, depression set in.
And I say, I wish Jesus would call me home. But my daughter says, no, he don't want you yet.
I prayed. I said, Lord, you know, I'm putting it all in your hands and I'm trusting you that you're going to make a way for her to have, you know, to find her purpose here, you know. And he did.
Anne saw an ad on a bulletin board that volunteers were needed to make items for orphans in India. Mrs. Vitolo found her purpose.
She really has a lot of joy just doing this. She can do it all day long and she just doesn't get tired.
What that lady is doing, it's amazing because something that is giving her life, which is also breathing in life and nurture to a child in another country.
Ranjit Abraham knows what it's like to be without a purpose. He grew up in the shadow of his father, a well-known pastor in India who founded 17 orphanages.
I never wanted to be a part of this because I don't know how it is in this country, but in my country, when you become a pastor and you come to the bottom of the food chain.
Ranjit was pursuing a graduate degree at Regent University when an unlikely partnership emerged.
Out of all my classmates, there's one in particular that I don't necessarily get along with, being an African-American woman from New York City, having a very strong personality, and he being an Indian male from a very chauvinistic country. So we didn't get along. But God had a bigger plan.
Ranjit and Aisha are now best friends, part of a movement called glocalization, encouraging people to serve at a local level for global impact. After finishing graduate school, Ranjit returned to India. He and Aisha work across the globe to provide his father's orphanages with more than basic needs, like playrooms for children who never had toys, or homemade blankets to cover them with warmth and love. They see Mrs. Vitolo as a perfect example of a glocal servant.
To have a little Italian grandmother in the middle of America to say, I'll take my frail hands and I will create something for you that's a practical need.
Versus like, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at your heart. What does that mean to us? But when you see what Mrs. Vitolo is doing, it makes complete sense, you know?
Oh, here he is.
Once a year, Ranjit returns to the United States. This time, he made a new friend.
Hello! Raji.
Yes!
How are you? I'm Connie. I'm the one making blankets for your little orphans.
Oh my God, so good to see you.
Yeah, you are good looking, buddy.
Am I? Do you want me to show you some pictures of the kids that are gonna get this?
Yeah, I would love to see them.
Can you see that? That's them.
Ah.
They've come from the streets, you know? They don't have a parent,
Right.
they don't have a mother, they don't have a
That's what I
father.
want. People that don't have anybody. And if this one of these can cover them when they're cold, I'll be happy. I wish I had one here. I would hug her and kiss her. Jesus has a purpose for us all, but I never thought he had a purpose like this for me. And I'm very happy and honored and humble. Jesus, I love you. I thank you and I praise you all my days until the day I come home to you.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, and by it, we mean Christmas. New York City lights up with Christmas trees, Christmas lights, and you can't help but notice the famous window displays. Macy's is not only well known for the parade of all parades, but also for its window displays. Holiday onlookers can't help but notice the glittering decor.
Here in the city makes me feel like a little kid. Everything is great, lights beautiful.
One of this year's windows tells the tale of Alex, a young boy with a magic telescope who experiences Christmas on other planets with his dog, Bella. This story comes to life using 3D and high-definition features. Another connection that Macy's has with Christmas is the 1947 film Miracle on 34th Street. Now, I want to do some investigating and find out who knows the film associated with where we're standing right now. What holiday film is associated with Macy's and Christmas?
I need my wife's help on this. Adrian?
We got a lifeline here. What film is associated with Macy's and Christmas time?
Miracle on 34th Street?
Yeah! What film is associated with Macy's and Christmas time?
Actually, I have no idea what that.
It's a blank on 34th Street.
Blank on 34th Street?
I'm not sure.
I don't know either.
Miracle on 34th Street. No?
Oh.
I need an NYPD group answer here. Is associated with Macy's and Christmas time?
Miracle on 34th Street.
Yes. Okay, see, not everyone knows that.
Miracle on 42nd Street?
42nd Street?
I don't know. What is
Or 34th Street?
34th Street, okay.
Okay, you got it right. After looking at all these window displays, I cannot decide which one is my favorite. But whether you're in the city, a suburb, or in the country, I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and God bless. I'm Angela Zatopek, CBN News, New York City.
I'm all for a Miracle on 42nd Street as well. Used to live there. That is going to do it now for CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. Take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. It is Thursday. Make it a thankful one.